Greetings from the Holy Land, the Holy Apple. Holy time, Super Wednesdays here in the Holy Apple. We are on the 21st day of the month of Kislev, coming close, really close to Hanukkah, 5779, in case you forgot what year you're in. And just in parenthesis, we have not forgotten, we have to finish 2 classes. It just, sometimes got to take a break and roll with the punches. So we have 2 classes, we did not forget about them, and they're not finished. One is the Pittsburgh 11, and the second classes have the Jews been out-trumped by Trump dealing with kindness of the non-Jewish world. What does it mean for the Jewish people? We will come back to that. Anyways, God willing, probably 2 parts this class has. I imagine 2 parts. This will be in honor of the time of Hanukkah, which is coming up in a couple of days. So, actually we have 2 classes today and also next week, with God's help, that we'll be talking about the subject on hand, which of course is Hanukkah. Of course, our classes are still, we have the same principles here. We give the class to remove the divine presence from the exile and the desecration of God's name. The class is dedicated for ourselves, me first, to improve ourselves and to act upon the lessons that we learn. Okay, so put on a couple of seatbelts, you're going to need it. Subject today, in honor of the Hanukkah holiday coming up, will be Hana and her 7 sons. The shocking, real story they never taught you in school. Hana and her 7 sons, the shocking, real story that they never taught you in school. So, with that said, let's go. Story is pretty much known when you're in kindergarten, nursery even, and the beat goes on. You're older, you're in a Jewish school, yeshiva, and everybody knows, all Jewish kids know the story about the heroine named Hana. She had 7 sons, and they were captured by the Greeks, and the evil king Antiochus asked each one of the 7 boys to bow down to worship various idols, and one after another refused, and they were all killed one after another. Eventually, Hana went up, she was on a rooftop, and she fell off of the roof, and a voice from heaven came out, Ema banim smecha, rejoice, the Holy Mother of the boys. Okay, that's the story. We know it backwards, we know it forwards, or at least until today we thought. Let's, once again, as they say in Hollywood, take 2. Let's take 2 on the story, and we'll see amazing things, God willing. Okay. Question number 1 is, when exactly did the story take place? Hey, it took place on Hanukkah. Well, it's not a question. Okay, not simple. Not simple at all. We have basically 2 different sources, 2 different streams of when this happened, and actually who did this happen to. According to our source, Tana Devei Eliyahu, according to that source, the mother was not named Hana. She was actually named Miriam Bat Tanchum, or Nachum, or Nachtom. Different places the name appears a little bit different. So in this source and a few other sources, we're talking about a different woman. She happens to have the same amount of sons, but a lot of people, I have same amount of kids a lot of other my neighbors have. It's not unusual. However, what is interesting is that according to Tanad Veliyahu, the story of Miriam, the daughter of Tanchum, this happened after the fall of Beitar. So we're talking about at least 65 years after the destruction of the second temple. That's when this event happened. And who was the head honcho? Who was the chief? The chief was the Caesar. His name was Adrianus. And the story is between Miriam and her 7 boys and the king, the Caesar of Rome, after the fall of Beitar. On the other hand, we have accounts in the book of Josephus, in the book of the Maccabim, story of Hanukkah. There we have a different name, a woman named Hana, and she has 7 sons. And when did this take place? According to these sources and others, once again, I'm not mentioning all the sources, just naming 1 or 2. According to this source, the story of Hana and her 7 sons occurred approximately 5 years before the Jewish revolt in the time of the Maccabees, 5 years before. This was a period of time where there were tremendous decrees against Judaism, against the Torah, against the Jewish people. And, of course, the evil king in this story, his name was Antiochus, who was the king of Syrian Greek nation. Another interesting difference. How old? We know there is a long dialogue between the 7th son and the king. The first 6, they all said a verse from the Torah to refute any connection to idol worshipping, and then they were killed very quick. The last little kid, there is a long conversation, dialect that takes place between this little kid and also Hana gets into it, where she was silent in the other cases, at least what we know about. Maybe off the scene she was active. So we have here also 2 opinions on the age. According to Tanad Veliyahu and other sources, this little boy was 2.5 years old and 7 hours. Now, there's a reason why I mentioned this interesting addition. Okay, I get the kid was 2.5 years old. What's the 7-hour bit? According to Josephus and the book of the Maccabees, we're talking about Josephus in chapter 19. He writes there that the young boy was 7 years old. 7 years old. Now, the reason I bring up the age here, because one of the commentators on our sage's words called Echa Rabbah, was the commentator is known as Yafeh Anaf. It was written by Rabbi Shmuel Ashkenazi. He is one of the leading commentaries on the books of Midrash Rabbah. And he writes here that there are places in the Torah or in the oral law where an age is given, and it's not to be taken literally. It's to be taken as an expression of, let's say, holiness. For example, it says by King Saul that he was 1 year old when he took over. Now, we don't know too many kings that are 1 year old. So what's going down over here? So the Talmud says, oh, it's not really that he was 1 year old, of course. How could a king be 1 year old? It means either that he was in his first year of reign, or he was a pure soul like a 1 year old. So many times the Torah uses numbers, and they're not to be taken literally. They represent a certain concept. But here, Rav Shmuel Ashkenazi, in his commentary on Eicha Rabbah, we're on chapter 1, verse 50. He writes here it cannot be taken, here we have to take it literally. Why? Because our sages made an effort to tell us even how many hours he was 2.5 years old, and 7 hours. I mean, this was like some special kid. Now, what the Yafeh Anaf bothered him, how could a 2.5-year-old child carry on a dialogue on such a high level that we see in our sources that this kid was like unbelievable. This kid's like Superman. How's he able to verbalize? How's he able to present his case before the king? This kid is 2.5 years old. Now, I tell you, personal experience, I have the honor for many years to teach kids as young as 2.5 years old. That's when most of them start with me. And I could tell you that pretty much every year there's 1 or 2 kids amongst, let's say, 20 kids that are way ahead of their age group. Like, you could really have a conversation. They're like a couple light years in front of their age. So and this is in our times. If we go back, 2,000 years ago, 2,400 years ago, I don't have any problem understanding this literally, how such a kid could be able to maintain such a high-level conversation. I don't have any problem whatsoever. But anyways, this was bothering him. How could it be that such a young kid could have such a high-level conversation? But then he says that we have to take it literally. He was 2.5 years old and 7 hours. Very good. Now, right now, we're going to concentrate on the 7th son. On the 7th son. It says by the 7th son, it says in the Talmud, Tractate Gittin, page 57b, tells the whole story there. You could also look it up over there. And it tells us following. With all 6 brothers, it was straightforward, idol worshipping, bow down to whatever, idols, or it was straightforward. However, with the 7th child, we see some type of remorse or some type of trick, perhaps, that the king sees so far. Antiochus sees so far he's 0 for 6. He is unable to convince any of these kids to worship idols. And then he comes to this little kid who's either 2.5 years old or he's 7 years old. So now he has a new plan. What's his new plan? It says that he comes up to the little boy and he tells him, listen, I have in my pocket, there's various opinions what he had in his pocket. Some opinions said that it was a ring. There are opinions that it was a coin. And there are opinions that it was his stamp of his insignia, a stamp of his signature. In old days, they used to carry in their pockets this like it was like a rubber kind of stamp, and it had ink inside, and whenever they would have to sign their names, they would just put the stamp on it. So those are the three basic opinions, what he took out of his pocket. Now there's also, in addition, some commentators, for example, like Rashi. Rashi says that the king's face was on this stamp. The king's face was on the stamp. And why do we care if the king's face is on the stamp or not? Because it could very well be that this was the king looked at himself as a god, as many times we see in the days of old, that many of these kings believed that they had supernatural powers. For example, in the times of Pharaoh, Pharaoh played to his people as if he was God. In fact, he was never seen going to the bathroom, to the men's room. That's because he always went out early in the morning when nobody was awake, and even his guards were sleeping, and he would go somewhere around the Nile River, and then he would go to the bathroom over there. But we see throughout history that there were many kings that made themselves into a godly figure. So this could be the coin which had the king's picture, or the stamp that had the king's picture. This could be a form of actually idol worshipping by bowing down to the coin which has the picture. However, there are other sources that say that it was basically it was a ring, or it was a coin that did not have any type of idol worshipping on it. So the king says, listen, I have a win-win situation, he tells the kid. We have a big crowd here. How do we know that? Because we know that this was a tremendous sanctification of God's name. This case with Hana and her 7 sons, we know that in the times of the Romans and the Greeks, they would invite the population to witness and testify in these kinds of killings, and to show the Jews are bowing down to the idols, or whatever the transgression would be. This is something that they would invite. Also, Jews were forced to come down to see this. So there's a big crowd out there. So the king pulls over the little kid and says, listen, I have a win-win situation. I'm going to throw down this coin or whatever, and you, of course, you go down and pick it up, and of course your idea will be that you're picking up the coin. You have in your heart, in your thoughts, you have no idea whatsoever, you have no thought whatsoever that you're going to acknowledge or worshiping idols. But to the crowd will see that you are bowing down to me. It looks like they don't know. You have thousands of people in a stadium. Nobody knows if you happen to throw out of your pocket. No one's looking. Today, for sports games, they have 800 different cameras from all different angles. You could see it from above, from the sides, from behind. But those were, today, not in those days. So it was very easy. He says, listen, no one's going to notice that I'm throwing something out of my pocket. So you go pick it up. You have your intentions are just to pick up this coin, or pick up this ring, and people will look at it. The spectators here will understand it, that you went and bowed down to me because either he considered himself to be a god, or in the vicinity there were idols in the vicinity of where the center stage was. One of the two options. Okay. Now, anyways, that was the scenario. It didn't work for the king. He's 0 for 7, and the little kid refused to bend down. Okay, now, here's where we fasten our seatbelts. There's a big, big problem here, folks. This is what they never taught us in school. You might tell me that the first pieces of information that we went over also didn't teach you in school. That's also right, but no extra charge for it. Now we're going to the meat and potatoes of the subject here, what we were never taught in school. We have a problem here that it says in the tractate of idol worshipping on the 12th page. It tells us that we are not allowed to do a certain various actions. We are not allowed to do various actions because to the observer or to the passerby, they might think that we're doing something that's connected to idol worshipping. So we have to stay away from those kinds of things. Anyways, the Talmud brings down there 3 examples. We're going to hit on one. This is, now I'm reading now from Maimonides, The Laws of Idol Worshipping, chapter 3, paragraph law 8. It says the following, that masks, faces of statues that are before idol worshipping, so you have fountains spurting out this water. On one hand you have these faces, masks, water is coming out of these bodies, and near in the proximity we have various idol worshipping. That is, many times the nations of the world, they would take idol worshipping, and in order to make it more appealing to the crowd, they would put beautiful architecture and sculptures of faces and bodies, and they would put water, and they would have the water coming out of the mouth. So let's say a person today, you go to a water, a water fountain, and you push a button, and then you bend over and you drink water, right? That's how it works. So during these days, they didn't have a button back then, so they had these springs and water coming out of them, and all different heights, depending on how high you are. So for me, it was a certain height, and for Tzvi, he's much higher, much taller than I am. It's different height for him. So you, according to Maimonides and according to the Talmud, you are not allowed, if you're thirsty, you are not allowed to put your, to bow down, to bend over in order to drink from these masks and bodies that are coming out of water. Why? Because a passerby, observer, will see you, and they'll think that you are bowing down to the idols which surround this water fountain. So you're not allowed to do it. Okay? Very good. Now, that was Maimonides. However, in the Torah, the Jewish law maven, the book of the Torah, he writes in Yoradea 150, that's chapter 150, that's law 3. He writes something else, an amazing, he says what we see in the Talmud is what he writes. What does he write, the Torah? He writes that you are not allowed, a Jew is not allowed to bend down to drink from one of these fountains. And he eliminates 2 words. Fountains that are near idol worshipping. Whoa, what's going on over here? I understand that if in the proximity of these fountains, these water fountains with the masks and the bodies, I understand that you're not allowed to bend down and take a drink because people will think that, right, they see the idol worshiping in the proximity, they might put one and one together, that a Jew here is worshiping idols. So there's a rabbinical law that because you're not allowed to bring yourself in a position where people will suspect you. A person has to be 100% clean. You can't go into a non-kosher restaurant, and people will see you with a skull cap on, and they'll say, oh, well, I saw somebody religious in the restaurant, and now he takes from this or she takes from this that we're allowed to eat in this restaurant. So you always have to worry about perhaps people are going to go by and notice this. Even if you think that nobody is looking, the law still is the same law. Even if you're in a room within a room, the law stays the same. There's a rabbinical prohibition to bring upon yourself any types of suspicion that you're doing various things that go against the law of the Torah. So, we have now, the Torah writes, this is also accepted by the Jewish law given by the Taz, the Turei Zahav, in the Code of Jewish Law, that the case here is like the Talmud says, there was no idol worshipping around. Oh, so what's the problem? There's no idol worshipping. That's true. But the Gentiles in many, many places, they would erect the idol worshipping, and then in the proximity, they would put these beautiful water fountains where people would come to drink. And this way, so it's true, right now, you're in a place where there's only these water fountains, but people are accustomed to see these water fountains around the places which are erected different idols, different idol worshipping. So therefore, because of the fact that if you go and take a drink and you bend down to take a drink, people might see you and they might think that you are worshipping, you are bowing down and acknowledging idol worshipping. But there's no idols here, it doesn't matter. These types of places, many, many times, that's how they are built, to include both. So this is a very, very important point that the Torah makes, that you're not allowed to bend down there. According to Maimonides, according to the Shach in the Code of Jewish Law, they both agree that if there's no idol worshipping around, you would be able to take a drink. Now, here's the problem. What happens if I understand so far everything is cool? Okay, I'm not going to take a drink, I'll find somewhere else. I'll find somewhere else, I'll find a stream, I'll find another water fountain somewhere else. Okay, the problem here is, what is the opinion? What is the opinion if there is a danger to one's life in similar situation? Would a person be allowed to bend down and take a drink from this faucet if there was some type of danger to one's life? So now, it seems like a pretty simple question. Why? We have a place where there are water fountains with these masks and these funky bodies that we have water coming out of them. So the reason why we are not allowed, we must abstain from bending down to take a drink. Why? Because we would be suspected of perhaps worshiping idols. Whether there are idols there or not is right now is irrelevant. But people will suspect us. Okay, but this is a rabbinical prohibition. We're talking about baby, we're talking about life. We're talking about what would seem a Torah prohibition of endangering one's life. So if we have to place on the scale person's life and a person's being suspect, a rabbinical ordinance, it seems pretty clear that you don't have to give your life, that you would be allowed to drink. For example, a person is about to dehydrate. A person feels like he's about to die. He hasn't taken a drink for 3 days, he's about to lose it, and now he gets to these fountains and he says, oh my God, like he thinks, finally sees water. Can you imagine that? You finally get to this water, you've been in the desert for 2 or 3 days, man, and all of a sudden he looks up and these faces, these masks with water coming out, and then he remembers what it says in the Talmud. He remembers what it says in the Code of Jewish Law. Oh man, what do you do here? Do you bend down and say, listen, my life is on the line here. I better take a drink over here. Because we know that a danger of life takes precedent most of the time of all the commandments of the Torah. If a person on the Sabbath has a danger, there's a question of a danger of life, or even a question mark of a danger of life, we know it takes precedent. A person's life takes precedent over a commandment of the Sabbath. There are only a few commandments that a person would not be able to use this excuse. Just one quick, we know that there is a commandment to go and fight in the land of Israel. How could that be? Because it would seem like that would be a going against the Torah and going against Jewish law, because you're not allowed to put yourself in you're not allowed to put a person's self into danger. But we know that in the army and in wars, people, unfortunately, Jews die. In fact, in the last 70 years, we've had over 23,000 Jews have been killed, murdered during wars against the Arab nations. So Jews do die. How are you allowed to put yourself on the line? We know that the principle is that a person's life takes precedent over the commandments. One of the commandments is to liberate the land of Israel, to settle the land of Israel. Okay, if it's not dangerous, we'll do it. No, it doesn't work like that, because there's certain commandments, the inherent value of the commandment is putting yourself on the line. A war, you can't tell people you have to fight war, but only if it's not dangerous, because a war in itself is considered to be dangerous. So this is one, and there are other examples where a person's life comes second, not first. But generally speaking, okay? So, question is, what it says in the Talmud, that you're not allowed to bend down, whether there's idol worshipping there, or whether there's no idol worshipping, okay? We know that you're not allowed to bend down. That's very nice. But what happens? Our sages bring up a question. What happens if there's a danger to one's life? What then takes precedence? The rabbinical prohibition to cause suspicion to the population? People will think that you're transgressing, or a person's life. So, there are various opinions on this subject. First, let's look at the Ran. The Ran, in the first chapter of the Tractate of Avodah Zarah, he says the following. If there happens to be an additional, when a person goes to a fountain and there's an additional danger to a person's life, there's an additional factor of now a person's in danger of his life. Let's say somebody comes up with a gun and say, listen, if you don't bend down and drink from this faucet, because I want people to see a Jew bending down and then think that he's bending down to idol worshipping, whether there's idols there or not is irrelevant, because most of the time people associate these fountains with idol worshipping on the side. So what would a Jew say? I'm going to, well, kill me because I'm not going to bow down. I'm not going to take a drink from this faucet. So the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, he gives his opinion of the law that in such a situation, we tell a person to violate this rabbinical prohibition, to cause yourself to be suspect of transgressing, and you have to get down and bend over and drink. That's the opinion of the Ran. According to Maimonides brought down only one case. He didn't bring a second case where there was a danger. However, one of the leading commentaries on Maimonides is a book called Maseh Rokeach, and the Maseh Rokeach in chapter 3 on Maimonides, chapter 3, law 8, he writes that according to Maimonides, if there was a danger of a person's life, then they would be commanded to bend down and drink from those fountains. Why? Once again, you have a Torah prohibition, and you have a rabbinical prohibition, and of course the Torah prohibition of endangering yourself here, and it's not idol worshiping. If you were idol worshiping, that's something else. You're not idol worshiping here. Here, there's just a suspicion. This is the way that people many times would bow down by these fountains. But it's not worshiping idols at all. So therefore, that's what Maimonides would say. That's what Rabbeinu Nissim would say. Also, if you open up or reopen up the Code of Jewish Law, Yoredea 150, verse 3, the Ramah, who gives the laws for the Ashkenazi population, he writes very clearly that if there's any type of danger, then a person would be able to bend down and drink from those fountains. So here's the problem. Here's the problem. Dum da-dum, dum da-dum da-dum. Yeah. Okay, so in the book Likutei He'arot, he asked the following question. He says, I don't get it. We are told in the tractate of Gittin 57, we are told about this little boy, that the king tells him, listen, I'm not asking you right now to bow down to idols. I'm telling you right now, go down, bend down and pick up a ring, pick up a coin, pick up this stamp. Who in the world gave permission to this little child of 2.5 years old or 7 years old? Where was his mother? Let's call the social services here on the mother here, call up social service, have her arrested here. What's going on over here? This is the question of Likutei He'arot. What's going on over here? The law should have been here that once there is a danger to a person's life, and we saw that 6 of his brothers were blown away. Now he's in a situation where they're not telling you to worship idols. They're telling you, go bend down and pick up a ring. So here, there's a problem that the crowd will look at this kid and they'll think that he's bowing down to idols, or to the king, or to the idols that were in the vicinity. That's what they're going to think. But it's not so. The king even tells them, in your heart, in your thought, in your mind, you know that you're not worshiping idols here. You know that you're not bowing down to these idols. So what in the world was going on over here? Why did they allow this little boy to be blown away? He should have been told by his mother that, listen, in such a case where it's not idol worshipping, it's just the crowd will assume that you're bowing down to the idols or bowing down to the king, whatever it might be. They might assume this, but we know that what takes precedent is of your life, and therefore go down and pick up that coin or pick up the ring. So this, okay, here, this is a big problem over here. This is not just the opinion of the Likutei Ha'arot. By the way, it's on page 60 for those that want to check it out. But it even goes further. Back to Rav Shmuel Ashkenazi on his commentary on the Eicha Rabbah, chapter 1, paragraph number 50. Listen to what he says. Unbelievable take on this little kid. Here's what he says. He says, we know in the time of the evil king Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylonia, we know that according to many of our sages, when he told the Jewish people or the nations to bow down to this type of idol, we know that there are many opinions that it was not idol worshipping. It was just a statue to give honor to the king. It had nothing to do with idol worshiping. You know, you go into stadiums today, and outside they got the stars. You go to Wrigley Field, you see a statue of Ernie Banks. You see a statue of Ron Santo. And, you know, in Cleveland, you see LeBron James, used to be. So it's an honor. It's not idol worshiping. Well, some people call the stars idols, which is very interesting. Movie stars, rock stars. Yeah, they call them, oh, you're my idol, which is very interesting. But that's for a different class. But anyways, just keeping it simple over here. It's not idol worshiping. It's just a statue to honor people. So he says, that's why most of the Jewish people decided to bow down. There were 3 people in the time of the king of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who refused to bow down. They decided to be stringent with themselves. Okay, very good. You're stringent with yourself. But here, so listen to what the Rav Shmuel Ashkenazi writes. He says, this case, if we know that a king like Nebuchadnezzar, made a statue which was not idol worshipping, how much more so, he says, in our case with this little boy and Hana and her 7 sons, how much more so? How in the world was he convinced? How in the world was he allowed to give up his life, this little kid? The people in the crowd, why didn't they stand up? They brought Jews, they forced Jews to witness these events. Why didn't they stand up and say, listen, the law is you can't take your own life. You have to just pick up the ring, the coin. And he says more so, not only was this not a positive, it seems like it wasn't a positive act, this was a negative act, because there are many, many Jewish authorities when it comes to law that say straight out, for example, Maimonides, Nachmanides, and others, that say straight out, when the Torah tells you that you should not give up your life, and you think that you want to be strict with yourself, and you want to go beyond the letter of the law and give up your life, not only is this not a positive thing, it is a negative thing, and you'll pay the price in the world to come. You're going to pay the price for giving up your life when you didn't have to. That's what he says over here. An amazing, just amazing. So folks, we're in hot water here. We're in hot water. What was going on in the mind of Hana, the mother? What was going on in the mind of the spectators, Jewish spectators at least, when this kid is given a chance to save himself by just picking up, has no intentions to worship idols, no thoughts of idol worshiping. He's not worshiping idols, just the spectators will think that he's bowing down to the king who's made himself a god. We know that in the time of Purim, Haman, he made himself into a god. And therefore that's why Mordechai refused to bow down, because according to the tractate of Sanhedrin on page 21, a person can make himself into idol worshipping. A person can make himself. So therefore that's why Mordechai, even though the Jewish people came down on him, got on his back, they said, why don't you just honor him? Even so, that was his take based on this Talmud in the tractate of Sanhedrin 21. Okay, so we have all these questions. What in the world was going on over here? Why didn't somebody put a stop to this? That kid, it seems to be, that kid was killed in vain. He could have been saved. Could have got married later on, had a family, and lived on. Okay. Next problem. Next big question that we have. Folks, we know that commandments, there are 613 commandments. Who are the people that are commanded? Sometimes men, sometimes women, sometimes men and women. But any way you slice it, whether they are men or women that are obligated to the 613 commandments, we know that you have to be, in order that you are obligated to observe the commandments, we know that you have to be of age. What is of age? We're not talking about, you want to buy a drink, you have to be 18, some places 21. What is the age? So we know for a male, a Jewish male, you have to be the age of 13 to be obligated to all the commandments. For a girl, you have to be the age of 12. So the question here is, we do not know the age of all these 7 kids. We know that the youngest one was either 2.5 or 7. Could be very well that there were other kids amongst the 7 sons of Hana that were also killed, who were below the age of bar mitzvah, below the age of 13. So for crying out loud, we know that the parents are commanded to teach children how to observe the commandments. That's for sure. We have to teach kids how to act, how to say blessings over our food, teach them how to pray, teach them the Torah. They're not obligated, but we have a commandment to teach them. That's very nice. But we don't have, it would seem like there is no commandment, or it would be against the commandments to take children that are not obligated in the commandments and tell them, listen, right now your life is on the line and you have to give your life for the sake of God's honor. Whoever heard such a thing? These are minors. And it would seem, at face value, it would seem that it would be the responsible and the Jewish and the Torah outlook that children would always be discouraged to give up their lives for any of the commandments. So, is this so or not? Just at face value, it seems problematic that young kids are giving up their lives when they are not obligated to fulfill the commandments. So, listen, put on a seatbelt. Really amazing here. We know we got it somewhere. Okay. Best hiding place. The Baalei Tosfot. If you look in the writings of the Baalei Tosfot, sometimes it comes in the end, if you have a very, very first class 5 books of Moses at the end, you'll see the words of the Tosfot, which is on the oral law. And if not, there are separate books which contain the words of the various Baalei Tosfot. Now, this comment that I'm telling you is in the portion of the week of Noah. It's in the chapter 9, verse 5. Listen to the words first of the Torah, and then we'll get to what the Tosfot has to tell us. Okay, and surely your blood of your lives will I require at the hand of every beast and at the hand of every man. Whoso sheds man's blood by man, shall his blood be shed. What do we learn from this? We learn many things, but one of the things that we learn from here is that a person is not allowed to take their own lives. You're not allowed to take your own lives. And if a person is not allowed to take his own life or her own life, then how much more so that you're not allowed to take other people's lives. Here's where we learn it from. Generally speaking, the Torah uses the word ach. Ach comes to exclude. There are certain cases where a person could take his or her life. But the general principle is you're not allowed to touch yourself. You're not allowed to injure yourself. You're not allowed to harm yourself. You're not allowed to kill yourself. All these are connected. Harming, killing, injure. Okay, listen, an amazing case. Here's what the Baalei Tosfot says. Okay, I'm gonna translate every single word here. This is an amazing case. On this verse, he brings out the following. There was a case in history where there was a rabbi. This rabbi killed many, many young children. Why was he killing young children? If this was at a time where there were religious decrees against the Jewish people, and the rabbi was afraid that these children would not be able to stand up to the pressure that was being placed upon them by the nations, and they would cave in, and they would give in, and they would begin transgressing laws, accepting upon themselves Christianity. So therefore, this rabbi, in order to make sure that these Jewish kids remain Jewish, there were decrees against Judaism, and therefore he went in secret and he killed off many, many children to make sure that they would not only live as Jews, but they would die as Jews. And they wouldn't, God forbid, give up the religion. By the way, there's amazing commentaries by, for example, Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin or the Michtav Eliyahu Rav Eliyahu Dessler. They all ask a question, how is it that we see throughout history the Jewish people over and over again, time and time again, they've put themselves on the line, they've given up their lives. We're not talking about a handful. We're not talking about a couple hundred. We're not talking about thousands. We're talking about, I imagine if there was a count, there are probably billions of Jews throughout our history. our history since receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai over 3,300 years ago, there have probably been billions of Jews that gave up their lives for keeping the commandments and not accepting upon ourselves foreign worship, whether it was Islam or whether it was Christianity. Where does this stem from? Where does this come from? And they all say the same answer. Our rabbis, they say that Maseh Avot Siman Lebanim, what you see in the Torah, the examples that our forefathers and mothers gave to us, this is the DNA of a Jew. And Abraham, he was the first Jew. He by his willingness to sacrifice himself, he went into a fire in order not to bow down to idols. He sacrificed himself. He sacrificed himself when his nephew Lot was captured by a foreign army. He went out and sacrificed and put himself and his men in danger in order to save his nephew's life. Abraham, who was willing to take his son that he waited for 100 years, he was willing to sacrifice his son and kill his son on the mountain of Moriah in the city of Jerusalem. So when you see throughout the ages, when you see Jews jumping into the water and killing themselves, or Jews jumping into fires, know where it comes from. It comes from our fathers and our holy fathers and our holy mothers. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. That's where it comes from. So therefore, who are we? We are midgets, but we happen to be on the shoulders of giants. That's who we are. We're a bunch of midgets. However, throughout all the ages and our DNA that was given over to us generation after generation, this is who we are. In fact, in the time of Hanukkah, what it's written in Josephus and other books, the book of the Maccabim, it says what freaked out, what the Greeks were most afraid of was the willingness of the Jewish people to sacrifice their lives. That's what they were afraid of. They weren't afraid of the Jewish might, the Jewish army. They were afraid of the willingness of the Jewish people to sacrifice their life for Torah, for the temple, for the land of Israel. That's what freaked them out. And that's how we were victorious with God's help. So back to the words of the Tosfot. So we have a rabbi who in his times there were decrees against the observance of Torah, against the commandments of the Torah. And he wanted to make sure that Jews remain Jews, died, lived Jews. So he took babies, he took children, and he killed them. And now the Tosfot is talking. He says, we were very upset. We were very upset with this rabbi. And we called him a murderer. But he did not listen to our words. He did not listen to our harsh terms that we called him. A murderer this guy is. And there was another rabbi that he held like the Balei Tosfot. And he said, listen, he came up to this other rabbi. He says, I want to tell you something. If the law is like what we say, that you are not allowed to sacrifice children for the sake of commandments, you have to do everything to try to save them. Maybe they'll be able to escape. Maybe they're able to survive. You are not allowed to take a minor's life. If the law is like we say, that you're not allowed to do such actions, and you're killing of these Jewish minors, if the law is so, then you, Rabbi, you are going to die not a natural death, but you are going to die an extremely, extremely cruel death. That's what's going to be. That is our measuring stick to know who's right. And the Balei Tosfot continue, amazing. It was only a short time after this dispute, after this argument, that the rabbi who was killing these children so they would remain Jews, the Gentiles caught this rabbi, and I'm not going to get into the gory details. You might be after lunch here or after dinner, so I don't want to, make you puke. Anyways, they killed him in a very, very graphic, cruel manner. And therefore the conclusion is that it could be that if this rabbi would not have killed these children, they could have been saved if he had not killed them. This, friends, is also brought in the Code of Jewish Law by the Beit Yosef. The Beit Yosef writes this in Yoredea 157. He brings down the story. It begins with the words Katvu od, Vikatvu od. So here's what he brings it down, and it seems when you review the words of the Beit Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, who lived 550 years ago, and the author of the Code of Jewish Law, it seems like he agrees to this idea of the Balei Tosfot, that when you're dealing with Jewish minors, you are not allowed to touch them, you're not allowed to kill them, even though they may accept upon themselves a foreign religion, even though they may never come back to Judaism, even though they will perform many transgressions, we're still not allowed to do such a thing because they are not commanded to sacrifice. They are not commanded anything. They are not obligated for the 630 commandments, how much more so that they shouldn't be put in any situation where they're going to be endangered, disregarding whether there's decrees against Judaism, against Torah, against practicing Torah, practicing commandments. We should do everything in our power to make sure that they escape, maybe that they hide, we hide them, or put them with different families, somehow try to save them. Now, this will be our last point, and then for all the answers, you have to come back next week with God's help. We'll be in Hanukkah next week. But here's the biggie. According to this Tosfot, where he looks at this rabbi, and he calls him a murderer for killing these Jewish kids so that they would remain Jewish. Dear friends, what are we going to say about Hana, the mother of these 7 kids? At least we know that one for certain, if not more, were under the age of obligation of 13. Who in the world gave permission for her to suggest? We have many sources when she would encourage them. She was the cheerleader, so to speak, to do it and not buckle, and to stay strong and to stay proud and not buckle in and give their lives. She was on the sideline. She was encouraging them. Who gave her permission? Is she not a murderer? Stay tuned next week.